an enormous amount of pressure to say, oh, well, you know, you can't do it, you mustn't do it, you must stop. The number of people affected by this is relatively small. The number of people who will come along and watch the show is large. It is something that we do once a year, and there is a reasonableness and a balance involved here. Yeah. So I agree. If I was doing this once a month, that would place an intolerable and unreasonable burden on other people in the community. But
I was just wondering, Damien. Sorry, it's Mihi here. I was just wondering. I mean, what kind of weight do you put in terms of on the relationships of the community? Because it sounds, you know, like there's a bit of a split, a divide in the community now. And you know, is it important to you to have a community that gets along?
If it means that I must submit my wishes to the views of an angry minority, then no. If the means by which you obtain peace is constant submission to the whims of an angry minority, then that's not a community. That is one person saying, right, this is what I want, and if you don't agree with me, there will be discord. I have rights. The people who own horses have rights, and there needs to be some form of give and take between the interest of those who want to enjoy fireworks and the interest of those who want to enjoy the quiet.
Although the others have no choice, do they? Because this is something you want and you're legally entitled to have it. I notice on the text you're getting supporters as well as detractors. But to turn your argument around, this is something that you want and that you are actually imposing on the people who don't want it.
But equally, other people want to own horses, but
they don't bother you.
And, well, no, but that's not true. If you're saying that because that person owns a horse, I can't let off fireworks, then the existence of that horse does inconvenience me. Now, if it was up to me and I was able to do what I want, I would have 3 or 4 fireworks shows a year because I like fireworks and I would like to have a lot more than one show a year. I don't do that because looking at it from the other side, that would be an intolerable and unreasonable thing for me to do.
Okay, and it's been interesting to hear you outline your arguments. Can I just ask you something, because you mentioned lifestyle choice right at the top of the interview. Wouldn't a 5-year-old be happy with last year's leftover fireworks? I'm just curious about why you want to celebrate the child's birthday with a big display.
Look, you know, they're 5-year-olds. They're happy with sparklers. But it's not just, let's be honest here, I mean, it's not just about doing it for the 5-year-olds. I mean, as I said at the start of this, I like fireworks. They are fantastic to watch and enjoy. I enjoy the process of setting them up and wondering how they're going to go. I'm not enjoying it at the moment because the amount of pressure that's been applied.
That's right.
But I enjoy that. It's intellectually challenging. It's fun, and I enjoy it. And those people around me and those who attend
understand.
Enjoy it. So,
thank you. Look, Damien, I've got to go. I'm just hearing the music, but I think we had an interesting exchange of views. Damien Grant, who's going to lit off the fireworks this weekend. Gary McCormick, lovely to have you on the panel.
Thank you. That was very interesting, as always.
Yeah, it was interesting.
He should try maybe a little horse next birthday for the 6-year-old.
For the 6-year-old. Mihi Narangi Forbes as well. Thanks, everybody.
Kia ora.
Kia ora, good evening. Welcome to Checkpoint. I'm Rowan Quinn, in tonight for John Campbell. Tonight on the program, a forestry service provider says the weekend's heavy rain in Tolaga Bay could spell the demise of forestry in the area. It comes as the Minister, Shane Jones, fires a warning shot for companies to front up. Also tonight, the Black Caps coach Mike Hesson on his shock resignation. Almost 1 in 5 Central Auckland homes bought in the first 3 months of this year were purchased by foreign buyers. National accuses the government of playing favourites by giving Northland more money out of its $1 billion provincial growth fund, more than any other region. And the cat who made a miraculous recovery after surviving a 4.5-hour drive from Auckland to New Plymouth.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, good afternoon. Ko Katrina Bat and aho. Almost a fifth of central Auckland homes bought in the first 3 months of the year went to a foreign buyer. Official figures show that overall in the March quarter, nearly 33,000 homes changed hands, of which just over 3% were people from overseas. However, the number of foreign buyers jumps to 7% in Auckland and almost 20% in the central Auckland suburbs. The Associate Finance Minister, David Parker, says this backs up plans to ban foreign buyers to ease pressure on the market.
This vindicates the New Zealanders who've been concerned about the number of houses that are being bought by overseas people in New Zealand. And we, in the Labour Party, well, in fact, I should say more broadly in the government, we all agree that the housing market should be a New Zealand market and it shouldn't be influenced by overseas buyers.
Associate Finance Minister David Parker. The National Party is accusing New Zealand First of feathering its nest in the north by allocating more than half of the money out of the Provincial Growth Fund to projects in Northland. It says Northland projects have won $61 million, while the rest of the regions combined have only received just over $42 million. National's Economic Development spokesperson Paul Goldsmith says given that 2 of New Zealand First MPs stood in Northland at the last election, including the Regional Development Minister Shane Jones, the funding imbalance is unfair.
More than half of the total funding so far has gone to one region, Northland, which he is actively campaigning in. And I think that's not good enough. People should expect fair access to what is a large fund.
National's Paul Goldsmith. However, Shane Jones says only a small proportion of the fund has been allocated and projects around the country are in the pipeline. Dozens of workers at the Queensgate Mall in Lower Hutt are still waiting to hear what will happen now parts of the building have been found to be earthquake prone. A section has been assessed at below 34% of seismic strengthening standards, the riskiest category. The ANZ Bank branch has already moved its staff. Charlie Drever reports.
50 shops in total are expected to be affected. However, the mall will remain open while remedial work is done. The mall was relatively busy for the middle of a weekday as people sought shelter on a rainy day. However, people working in many shops were unaware of the latest assessment of the mall's earthquake risk. When I spoke to the manager of Keshab, Bobby Babu, he said it was the first he had heard about it. The Queensgate Mall management says it alerted all 50 tenants involved via letter this morning. Call Charlie Drever, aho.
It could take up to 6 months to investigate whether logging companies operating in the Tolaga Bay area have breached their resource consents. The Gisborne District Council estimates 1 million tonnes of forestry debris, known as slash, has caused at least $10 million of damage to roads and bridges during flash flooding earlier this week. The council's chief executive says it's investigating, and if it finds companies have not complied with their consents, the council will consider prosecution. She says the logging companies are helping farmers clean up, but they're still trying to work out what to do with the debris. 99 people have now been confirmed dead around Guatemala's erupting Fuego volcano as political calls mount for the head of the country's emergency response agency to be sacked. It's claimed the agency failed to respond to evacuation warnings from volcanologists at least 8 hours before the volcano erupted. The BBC's Will Grant has more from Guatemala City.
Amid the disaster, the finger-pointing in Guatemala has begun. The argument revolves around a crucial question. Was the order to evacuate given clearly and with sufficient warning before Volcán de Fuego erupted on Sunday? The National Agency for Seismic Activity and Volcanology says that its conscience is clear, that they issued the relevant warning in plenty of time. They claim the responsibility for any failings lies with the Civil Emergency Authority, CONRED, which didn't then act on their warnings. CONRED's Twitter feed as late as 11 a.m. on the morning of the eruption said that it wasn't necessary to evacuate.
Will Grant. And authorities have cautiously resumed search and rescue operations, with time quickly running out to find any survivors. 192 people remain missing. A toddler is in a serious condition after an accident on a conveyor belt at Auckland International Airport this afternoon. A St John spokesperson says they took the 2-year-old boy to Middlemore Hospital. An aviation security spokesperson says the incident took place at the check-in area. It's 5 minutes past 5. Sport. No longer feeling he could give 100% to the job, Black Caps coach Mike Hesson has decided to quit the role a year before his contract was up. The 43-year-old Hesson, who's been in the job for 6 years, was contracted through until next year's World Cup, but will now finish it up at the end of next month. He says the job is all-consuming, but he's no longer able to give it the commitment it needs.
Look, I've missed 2 days of cricket in 6 years, and I've found those hard. It's not one of those jobs you can go on holiday. You're fully immersed in the job, and I think that's what the job requires. That's the way I've sort of lived the role. If you can't give it 100%, then you just give someone else a crack.
Mike Hesson. Lock Brodie Retallick's long absence from the All Blacks will continue after he was ruled out of the 3-test series against France. Scans have shown Retallick suffered a fractured shoulder in last week's Super Rugby match between the Chiefs and the Crusaders, and he'll now be out for 6 weeks. Retallick hasn't played Test rugby since midway through last year's Rugby Championship. He sat out the remainder of the year following a personal tragedy. Captain Sam Whitelock and Scott Barrett are the starting locks for the first test in Auckland on Saturday. The Golden State Warriors are just 1 game away from their 3rd NBA title in 4 years. They've beaten the Cleveland Cavaliers 110-102 in Game 3 of the best-of-7 finals series to go 3-0 up, with the possible series decider in Cleveland on Saturday. That's the news.
EQC gets an overhaul.
Empower these staff, fix the hamstring, let's move forward.
Tree cuttings pose a biosecurity risk.
We found some critical non-compliances that called into question the material coming out of that facility.
Tauranga Council atones for a botched development.
Tonight is not about pointing fingers at anyone else. We are mindful that Mr Heath has warned against a witch hunt.
Bureaucratic failings exposed on Morning Report with Guy and Espiner and Susie Ferguson, weekdays from 6.
Then on 9 to noon, should methane be treated differently in greenhouse gas accounting? And what would this mean for agriculture? And after 10, am I bothered? Award-winning British comedian and actor Catherine Tate on why her characters resonate and why being shy can be funny. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Met Service weather through to midnight tomorrow. Northland, scattered showers clearing early tomorrow, then fine. Auckland to Taumaranui, also Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and Taupō. Generally fine, but cloud and the odd light shower for a time today. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, showers returning to rain later today, easing tomorrow and clearing south of Wairoa. Taranaki and Taihape to Kapiti, rain for a time today, falling as snow above 700 metres. Partly cloudy tomorrow with isolated morning showers. Wellington and Wairarapa, rain easing to showers this afternoon, clearing tomorrow and becoming fine. Nelson, Buller, Westland and Fiordland, mostly fine, but a few showers about the west coast late tomorrow. Marlborough and Canterbury, cloud and the odd shower about Marlborough, North Canterbury and Banks Peninsula until early tomorrow, otherwise mainly fine. Otago and Southland, cloudy periods today with a few showers about the south coast, fine tomorrow, and the Chatham Islands showers. It's 8 minutes past 5 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thanks, Katrina. Tonight, one of the country's leading forestry service providers says up to 2/3 of forest land on the east coast may need to be retired. It comes as torrential rain on Monday washed 1 million tonnes of forest debris onto roads, bridges and properties in Tolaga Bay, which the Gisborne Council estimates will cost up to $10 million to clean up. And while the Forestry Minister Shane Jones called on companies to step up today, at least one company says the answer may be pulling out of the coast altogether. Bridget Burke reports.
The Minister of Forestry, Shane Jones, firing a warning shot after heavy rain at the weekend left an estimated 1 million tonnes of forestry debris strewn over Tolaga Bay.
Those photos have certainly floored me, and the size of the deluge and the extent of the damage, I just don't think that the forest consultants, the Olsons of the world, can walk away from that. Torrential rain on Monday washed the slash from forestry farms onto roads, bridges and properties, and the council estimates it'll cost at least $10 million to clean up. The Gisborne Council says just who will pay for the clean-up has yet to be worked out. But the Minister Shane Jones says the forestry companies need to front up. I haven't heard a spokesman from Olson's yet contribute And that disappoints me because they're meant to be New Zealand's foremost forestry consultants group. So I'm going to ring them and find out why they're so conspicuously silent.
P.F. Olsen is New Zealand's leading forestry service provider. Here's its CEO, Peter Clark.
It's not a great look, is it? And whether it's ours or other forest owners, it's an industry issue. We acknowledge that. Solving it is not so simple.
He says the deluge of more than 200 millimetres of rain in less than 24 hours caused the land to slip and the soil to slip away, forcing the logs to sweep away everything in their path.
Solving that, I think long term, some of this land's just got to be retired, and probably retired from pasture use as well as from productive forest use.
Mr Jones says he's in no doubt forestry practices need to improve.
The truth of the matter is that if there had been permanent stands of trees along the waterways, permanent stands, not only riparian, left in the forest so that not everything is clear felled, a lot of that debris I'm picking would not have made it to the waterways.
Peter Clark said he hadn't heard from Mr Jones today and said while new environmental standards dictated riparian planting, nothing could have prepared the area for the amount of rain on Monday.
And this sort of intensity of rainstorm, I really don't think what vegetation you had on that land, it would fail. This is some of the most erodible country in the world. It's crushed, sort of sedimentary, New Zealand's been tectonic plate up, erosion down several times. This is very weak rock and soils. And, back when it was native forest, before it was cleared for pasture, there are records of massive inundations of native logs down on Gisborne, Poverty Bay Flats and on the beach. So the riparians, yes, they'll help to an extent in certain storms, but this was a biggie, and the whole land has given way, and I don't think it matters if you've got a riparian or not in that situation. It's going to go.
Mr Clark says retiring up to 2/3 of the forestry land would have a huge impact on the Tolaga Bay area.
At the extreme, you'd say red zone is a no-go area for production forestry. We know it's no good for pasture. We've already learned that. And so that's a massive area of the East Cape and East Coast. That has implications because the whole of the Gisborne East Coast area's economic base is land-based. It's farming and forestry. Now, if you take that away, what does the town live on?
Gisborne Council's Chief Executive Nadine Thatcher-Swan says logging companies are helping farmers clean up, but they're still trying to work out what to do with all the debris.
It's very difficult to burn, to stockpile and burn wood in the middle of winter, but they're looking at various options. The whole area is a floodplain, so we don't want to pile them and then we have the issue of them all being cleared out, but people have been discussing various ways of maybe bringing them out from the area. But look, we're talking, there looks to be like 1 million tonne up there of logs. So we yet to just work through all the logistics around that.
Ms Thatcher-Swan says it could take up to 6 months to determine whether logging companies operating in the Tolaga Bay area have breached their resource consents. P.F. Olsen CEO Peter Clark says forestry owners have been meeting to discuss the clean-up and who pays.
Only one of our forest owners that we know about at this stage was a contributor to these floods and or to this debris coming down onto the Tolaga Bay area. And I've had a talk to that person, and yes, they're willing to assist in a small way, but they're also looking at their insurance policies, and whether that'll respond or not is unclear. Insurance companies are calling these kind of events acts of God, and if the forest owner has done everything to best practice and not broken any of the rules, and you'd have to say, well, as an act of God, it's up to the affected person, the landowner, to have their own insurance kick in those cases.
Mr Jones says Tolaga Bay was a major hazardous event and Cabinet will be briefed on the situation next week. For Checkpoint, Bridget Burke.
New Zealand cricket has a significant gap to fill after the Black Caps coach Mike Hesson made a shock resignation today. After 6 years in what he describes as an all-consuming role, Hesson says he wants to spend more time with his wife and 2 daughters. He says he can no longer give the job the 100% commitment it requires, especially with just a year until the next World Cup. Some of the highlights of Hesson's tenure were a place in the 2015 World Cup final and the strengthening of the the Black Caps Test match record. The team ascended to number 1 in the world in 2020, second in one-day internationals and third in tests during his time in charge. Sports reporter Clay Wilson caught up with Hessen after his announcement in Auckland today and started by asking if it had been a tough and emotional decision.
Oh, look, it is. I mean, it's because it means a lot. It's 6 years of my life that I've loved every minute of it, but I've committed 100% to the role for 6 years. So to just one day decide that you're not going to do that again next year takes a lot of thought, and it does. Yeah, I guess I'm emotional because it means a lot.
You spoke a little bit about it up there, about not wanting to split up the roles and potentially step down from, say, 2022 or a tour or two. That was quite a strong thing in your mind, you wanted to commit 100% to it?
Look, I've missed 2 days of cricket in 6 years, and I've found those hard. And I think it's not one of those jobs you can go on holiday. You just, while the team's playing, you're fully immersed in the job, and I think that's what the job requires. Whether other people that come in have different views to that, then that's entirely up to them, but that's the way I've sort of lived the role. I've given it everything, and if you can't give it 100%, then I think you don't have the capacity to do it, then you just give someone else a crack.
Obviously the relationships and that are a big part of it and a big highlight, but in terms of the cricket itself, do you have any personal highlights that come to mind over your time?
Look, I think Test series wins away from home and Test wins away are real fond memories, and obviously winning first Test series ever in the West Indies was big. Winning Tests in England were big, one at Leeds, and also the Test match in Sharjah for a different thing, but winning a Test match over there with what the group was going through at the time was a very special time. And obviously the one-day memories, the World Cup and a whole of a series and bits and pieces, they're all memories that I'll certainly reflect on fondly in time.
Because looking forward now, you're going to have some time. What's going to be, day to day for you for the next little while?
I've got school swimming tomorrow, so I'll obviously play a role there. But look, I think it's just sharing the load a little bit with Kate, and it'll, that integration will take a little bit of time. Having spend 9 to 10 months a year away, spending some time at home being a dad, and also just taking stock of where we are and where we want to go.
Just finally, I know you got to have some downtime, but is it something that you would like to come back to? I guess when you decide you want to get back and do it.
I'm only 43 and I'm a cricket coach, and I think that if I'm a better coach now than I was 6 years ago, I'd like to think I'll be a better coach again in time. So I guess when you leave at 43, you never shut the door on anything, and I've certainly loved my time at New Zealand cricket.
That's the Black Caps coach Mike Hessen speaking to Clay Wilson after his resignation today. And Hessen officially steps down from July the 31st, with New Zealand Cricket Chief Executive David White saying the planning for who could replace him is already well advanced. Almost 1 in 5 central Auckland homes bought at the start of the year were purchased by foreign buyers. New figures from Stats New Zealand reveal the number of houses changing hands in the first 3 months of the year, including how many were sold to people who are neither New Zealand citizens nor tax residents. Our reporter Tom Furley has more.
Across New Zealand, the number of foreign buyers on the property market remains fairly steady, making up just over 3% of home transfers, in line with previous reports. That figure includes both homes bought and sold and those transferred after a death or marriage settlement. There has been a slight increase since the last quarter of 2017, jumping from 2.9% to 3.3%. But Stats NZ's Property Statistics Manager, Melissa McKenzie, says it's not necessarily a result of more foreign activity.
That has been driven more by the fact that the total number of property transfers in New Zealand has gone down. There was a small increase in the number of homes transferred to non-New Zealand citizens and residents, but it was primarily driven by the fact the total number has gone down, which is why that proportion's gone up.
However, she says some increases in the statistics could possibly be attributed to planned law changes to restrict foreign buyers. The government plans to ban foreign buyers from purchasing existing properties, arguing they're pushing first-home buyers and families out of the market. Speaking from Hong Kong, the head of Chinese international real estate portal Juai.com, Carrie Law, says Chinese buyers have been trying to get in before the ban.
We do see Chinese people are more aggressive in terms of looking into opportunities in New Zealand, especially some of them are looking for good schools. Approximately 8% are looking for good schools, and then 75% are looking for own use instead of investment.
She says the figures don't justify the blanket ban. The head of the Real Estate Institute, Bindi Norwell, agrees and says the stats are confirmation the threat isn't real.
With 3.3% across the country being purchased by foreign buyers, it's really low. And so I don't think that banning foreign buyers is the right strategy going forward.
While the national picture painted by the figure isn't large, the influence of overseas property ownership fluctuates throughout the country. Buyers without New Zealand citizenship or residency visas make up just 1% in the booming Bay of Plenty, and less in the Hawke's Bay, while foreign buyers purchasing property in Wellington accounted for fewer than 2% of the market. In contrast, Queenstown had the highest proportion at almost 10%. However, many eyes will turn to the hot Auckland property market, where more than 7% of buyers were offshore. Areas like Franklin, covering the likes of Clevedon, Pukekohe and Beachlands, had less than 2% overseas buyers. However, the Waitemata local board area, which covers expensive suburbs such as Herne Bay, Ponsonby, the CBD and Parnell, had international buyers for 225 homes, almost 20% of the purchases. While the Real Estate Institute says those numbers aren't big enough to make a difference, David Parker, the Associate Minister of Finance and the man behind the proposed law change, says that would likely have pushed up prices.
This vindicates the New Zealanders who've been concerned about the level of number of houses that are being bought by overseas people in New Zealand. And we, in the Labour Party, well, in fact, I should say more broadly in the government, we all agree that the housing market should be a New Zealand market and it shouldn't be influenced by overseas buyers. And these stats show that it most clearly is being influenced.
The statistics show of 40,000 property transfers, 540 buyers were tax residents in China, 480 were from Australia, followed by residents from the UK and US. For Checkpoint, Tom Furley.
Northland is poised to become the avocado capital of New Zealand, with growers north of Kaitaia getting the green light for irrigation. 17 growers in the area have been granted resource consent to draw 2 million cubic metres of water a year from the Opori aquifer, but critics are calling it a suck-and-see decision that could ruin prized wetlands. Lois Williams reports.
New avocado orchards are transforming the Opori landscape. Nearly 1,000 hectares of trees are going in and thriving in the warm climate and free-draining soils. And today the growers secured the other magic ingredient. The Motutangi Waiharara Water Users Group has won the right to sink bores into the Opori aquifer to water their trees. The Chief Executive of the Avocado Council, Jen Schooler, says it's excellent news for the industry.
It's fantastic news that we've got the water that our growers think they need and that we've got access to that resource to be able to grow that rural community.
Some of the new and larger avocado growers in the far north are corporates, investors from Auckland and Australia, but others, including Georgina Tui and Matty Kovic, are local dairy farmers wanting to make the switch to avocados. Ms Tui says that could transform not just land use but the economy of the Opori Peninsula.
I look at our farm and we're quite a small dairy farm as far as it goes these days. We milk probably 200 cows and we employ maybe one person full-time. If you were to turn that into an avocado farm, which is what we're looking at, we'd be employing probably 8 people full-time plus all of the seasonal workers to go with that. The flow-on effect of that is that you would need more housing, you'd need more shop facilities. So I think, the whole area is just going to boom.
But not everyone's so optimistic. The Conservation Department opposed the water take, saying there's not enough known about the Opori aquifer to allow so many growers to plug into it. DOC's worried about the impact on protected wetlands like Waipapa Kauri and its world-class scientific reserve at Motutangi. It says it's not clear how those wetlands and the aquifer are linked, and a lot more research is needed before consents could safely be granted. The commissioners who heard the case for the resource consents agreed there was uncertainty about the magnitude of the changes that might happen. In their decision, they had this to say.
Lowering of groundwater levels poses a risk of seawater intrusion and a risk to existing users and to the health of the Kaimama wetland.
But they go on to say the risks can be managed.
This can adequately be addressed through an adaptive management strategy and a staged approach to taking the maximum consented volumes of water. There is agreement that the amount of recharge to the aquifer can comfortably sustain the level of groundwater abstraction that is proposed.
And that means constant monitoring to see how the increased water takes are affecting the aquifer. Far North conservationists are sceptical. Kevin Matthews is a local farmer and ecologist who chairs the Bushland Trust. He says the commissioners have effectively given growers permission to suck it and see, and that's a very risky way to deal with an aquifer that's the only source of groundwater on the peninsula.
It certainly confirms what the DOC submission was about, that there wasn't enough information currently to give the consent.
Kevin Matthews says he hopes DOC will appeal against the resource consents, and Georgina Tui says the growers are not counting their avos or breaking out the champagne just yet. She says the consents process has cost her and her partner $15,000 so far in legal costs, and she's fully expecting DOC to mount an appeal.
It's been an extensive process, but for us too, it's the unknown. We've been in limbo for over 2 years now, and it's really taken its toll on us mentally. So we're looking forward to resolution. Yeah.
DOC says it will scrutinise the avocado growers' water consents and make a decision within 3 weeks on whether to challenge them in the Environment Court. For Checkpoint, Lois Williams.
A cat's made a miraculous recovery after it survived a 4.5-hour drive from Auckland to New Plymouth, trapped in the grille of a car. The cat lost some of its claws and was suffering from hypothermia after hanging from the grille for the 360-kilometre trip. Jackie Poles-Smith from the North Taranaki SPCA told me while the cat was making a good recovery, they were no closer to tracking down its Auckland owners.
We got a phone call from the Devon Hotel saying that they had a car parked in their car park with a cat trapped in the grille of the car. And the staff of the Devon Hotel actually managed to extract him from the grille with the help of the owner of the car. And it turns out that the owner had driven from Auckland that morning without stopping. And at some stage, this cat had become trapped in his car in the grille. So we assume the cat must have been there when he left Auckland because there wasn't an opportunity for it to get in during the trip. And this poor cat has literally clutched onto the grille of the car for a good 4.5 hours drive down to New Plymouth.
And what state was he in?
Well, we didn't know if he would survive. He was in appalling state. He was severely hypothermic. He was so cold that his temperature didn't register on the vet's thermometers, and they read down to 32 degrees. He was severely shocked. Luckily, he wasn't injured, apart from some claws where he'd been clutching on. And luckily, he got himself jammed enough in the bottom of the grille that when he was too weak to hold on anymore, he didn't fall off.
How does he get treated for the hypothermia? Does he get a little foil blankie like a person does?
He got thermal heat pads. So he was on heat pads, he had heated IV fluids, he had lots of rugs and hotties on him, and literally physically just warm him up. That first night we still didn't know if he was going to pull through, but by the next day he was making really good progress.
What about the owner? Has he got any idea who the cat could belong to?
No idea at all. He didn't recognise the cat at all from around his neighbourhood, had never seen it before.
And what sort of response have you had from people since you've sort of put the cat out there and asked to find out who his owners are?
I'm just going into work now to check and see if we've had any new news, but we've had lots and lots of comments on our post, lots and lots of people sharing the post trying to find this kitty his home. And he's such a friendly, lovely, smoochy cat. We're just so hopeful that we'll find his owners.
As you know, we're a radio show. A lot of our listeners are via the radio. Can you describe what he looks like?
Yeah, he's a lovely grey and white cat. He's fluffy or medium haired, got a lovely big fluffy tail, very, very friendly. He's too pretty to be a boy, actually. He's a very pretty boy with quite distinctive white and grey markings, so his owners would know him if they saw him. They can check our Facebook page, North Taranaki SPCA, to see photos of him. It's just, the sad thing is that he's not microchipped. If he was microchipped, we would have been able to get onto his owners the moment we found him.
And that was Jackie Pole-Smith from the North Taranaki SPCA, and we've just had a wee update. Still no sign of that little cat's owner, so let us know, or let the North Taranaki SPCA know if he sounds familiar. You're with Checkpoint. Coming up, National accuses the government of playing favourites by giving Northland more money out of its $1 billion provincial growth fund than any other regions. The economic cost of the shock closure of New Plymouth's Yarrow Stadium, and a French man wins the My Million lottery for the second time in 2 years. We love your feedback. Don't forget you can text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, Facebook us, Checkpoint with John Campbell, or email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. Right now, though, here's Katrina Batten with the headlines.
Foreign buyers were responsible for 20% of central Auckland house sales in the first 3 months of the year. Nearly 33,000 homes changed hands in the March quarter, of which just over 3% were people from overseas. But 7% of Auckland sales were to foreigners and almost 20% in the central suburbs. The government says the figures vindicate the government's plans to ban foreign buyers of existing homes. The Prime Minister says national claims of wasteful spending on working groups are false and misleading. National leader Simon Bridges says half of the government's working groups' inquiries and reviews will cost $114 million. But Jacinda Ardern says National's numbers are patently incorrect and include things like mediation work on the nurses' pay agreement. She says the government has 38 reviews using external groups costing about $34.5 million. Workers at the Queensgate Mall in Lower Hutt are in the dark about what will happen now parts of the building have been found to be earthquake prone. The ANZ Bank branch has already moved its staff and another 50 tenants are affected, but the mall will remain open. The Gisborne District Council says about 1 million tonnes of forestry debris has caused at least $10 million of damage to roads and bridges in the Tolaga Bay area during flash flooding earlier this week. The council's chief executive says it will consider prosecution if it finds logging companies have not complied with their consents. The National Party is accusing New Zealand First of feathering its nest by allocating more than half of the money out of the Provincial Growth Fund to projects in Northland. It says $61 million has gone to Northland projects with only $42 million to the rest of the regions combined. But the Regional Economic Development Minister, Shane Jones, says only a small proportion of the fund has been allocated so far. And a 2-year-old boy who was hurt on a conveyor belt at Auckland International Airport this afternoon is now in a stable condition in Middlemore Hospital. Those are the headlines. I'm back at 6.
Thanks, Katrina. And it's business now with Nona Peltier. Nona, we've been hearing about the avocado boom in Northland. It's getting heaps from the government's growth fund.
Well,
it's not the only good news.
No wonder the number one on the ASB Bank's scorecard for the regions. Yeah, Northland's number one. So, but they're number one in all areas. There's the 5 measures, and then one of them is employment, construction, retail trade, house prices, and new car sales. And they're rocking it all. So that's very good for Northland and way up there. So nice turnaround. They've pushed down the Bay of Plenty. The Bay of Plenty's done very well with the sun shining on the Bay of Plenty. Lots of tourists bringing lots of cash. And Tasman, which has been number one for a while, number 3. But mostly they're still strong with house prices and so on. Elsewhere, it's been weather woes. So the one that's come out the bottom is Taranaki, where they've been struggling with drought. And the outlook there isn't that great because, of course, oil and gas exploration is now not on the cards for them in the offshore drilling area. So, yep, I mean, overall, it's what you would expect, I guess, for a regional scorecard.
And our markets have been doing really well, riding on the coattails of those booming global markets.
Right.
a record high. What specifically is kind of pushing it up?
Oh, well, there's a few things. Okay, so basically what we're seeing globally are the market indexes around the world are doing really well, like Wall Street's very strong. And we're seeing things settling down a bit in Europe. That's helped, but at the same time, there's a lot of risks around. Never mind, though, our market has moved up 3% this week. 3%, that's a lot. Today, for example, it rose 1% to another record. That's 86 points up to 8,900. That's the highest it's ever been, and that's quite substantial. And we're seeing the same kinds of records being shattered in Asia. And a lot of our companies, not surprising, are also at all-time highs, and that would be like, say, Fisher & Paykel and the retirement village operators and so on. Zero, that relocated to Australia, is also at a record high. So yeah, overall, now that doesn't mean there aren't any risks. There's plenty of those, and you know, people need to be cautious somewhat because there's trade concerns, rising interest rates globally. These things could definitely turn the market around. So that's where our market finished today, and our dollar is also very strong: 70.4 US cents, 92 Australian, and 52.4 pence.
Good news all round. Thank you very much indeed. Thanks, Nona Peltier there with Business. Almost 100 people have now been confirmed dead around Guatemala's erupting Fuego volcano as opposition politicians call for the boss of the country's emergency response agency to be sacked. They believe the agency's failed to respond to advance warnings from volcanologists to evacuate the area at least 8 hours before the volcano erupted. Up to 200 people remain missing, and searchers say time's running out to find any more survivors. The BBC's Will Grant is in one of the worst hit villages of Los Lotes.
The tiny community of Los Lotes stood no chance. Flimsy shacks of tin and corrugated iron offered residents no protection when the awesome power of Volcán de Fuego thundered through their village. Everything was buried under the river of lava and ash. Homes, livelihoods, loved ones. Some are still looking for survivors, but it is an increasingly forlorn task. Instead, the desperate search has turned to the morgues. Wendy Hernandez has lost everyone she held dear. Her entire family, gathered for her mother's birthday, was wiped out in minutes. Her mother, sister, nephews, and what's breaking her heart most of all, her 2 teenage daughters.
All I could hear was screams. I begged her to tell me what was going on, but she did not respond.
With each passing day, this disaster isn't easing but worsening. It is now almost impossible that anyone still searching for lost loved ones will have any success, except perhaps in retrieving their bodies for burial.
The emergency services are working around the clock, but barely coping. The president says in this poverty-stricken nation there isn't a single extra peso available for the relief effort. And amid it all, Fuego is still active. A recent alarm prompted fresh panic among local people who fled any way they could. They say in Latin America, hope is the last thing you lose. But in Guatemala, that hope is fading fast.
And that's Will Grant reporting there from Los Lotes on the slopes of Guatemala's Fuego volcano. Nationals accusing the government of playing favourites by giving Northland more money out of its $1 billion provincial growth fund than any other regions. The fund is led by the New Zealand First Cabinet Minister Shane Jones, who's fronted up to MPs this morning to answer questions in what was an at times testy Select Committee hearing. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Chris Bramwell.
The Shane jacket with the Kiwi Rail insignia as a consequence of the love up in Wairoa and Ahuriri. Right.
Perhaps sensing National MPs would be locked and loaded, Shane Jones arrived at this morning's Select Committee sporting a high-vis vest with his name emblazoned on it. It wasn't long before Mr Jones was on the receiving end of a grilling from his national counterpart, Paul Goldsmith, who was clutching figures showing Northland had won 60% of the money allocated so far by the Provincial Growth Fund. Mr Jones defended the decisions thus far, saying the North was simply well prepared.
The fund came as a consequence of the political process to to create the government. And there's rule number one in politics: to the winner goes the booty. Now, let me continue. And the booty in this case, is to all the surge regions, and the best organised surge region, irrespective of how you want to spin it, has proven to be the leadership of the North.
But that wasn't good enough for Paul Goldsmith.
The Minister has been perfectly clear and shameless about the way he says, to the victor goes the spoils. More than half of the total funding so far has gone to one region, Northland, which he is actively campaigning in. And I think that's not good enough. People should expect fair access to what is a large fund.
The Mayor of the Far North, John Carter, says his district has had projects ready to go for a long time because of its regional economic development plan.
We've been working on this not just in the last 6 months, but over several years on different projects. And so this is just an accumulation of work that we've been doing. And here we are. We were able to, as soon as the fund became available, we were able to put some proposals up that were accepted, and we're on our way.
What do you think of the criticisms from National that it's just Shane Jones and Winston Peters feathering their nest in the north?
Well, I quite honestly, as far as I'm concerned, this is the north getting what we need, and we're right behind it.
The committee was told by officials that there's about $635 million worth of expressions of interest and $300 million in applications in the pipeline. 15% of that total is related to projects in the South Island. Shane Jones says he's visited the South Island and told leaders there to meet him halfway.
I'm a guy with political ants in my pants, and if a region is well organised and they have proposals that have been largely tested, then I don't think that region should be injured because others are a bit slower.
Shane Jones says the South just has to groom its proposals up to pass muster with officials. Atu I te whare pārimata mō te hōtaka o te ahi pōnei, ko Chris Bramalaho.
There's been political condemnation of the US President Donald Trump for the pardon he granted to an American grandmother jailed in 1996 for a non-violent drug conviction. TV footage has shown Alice Johnson running towards family members after leaving prison in Alabama. She was granted clemency by the president after he was lobbied at the White House by the reality TV star Kim Kardashian West. CNN's Pamela Brown reports Mr. Trump has up to 30 more pardons up his sleeve.
President Trump considering dozens of new pardons. That as he commutes the life sentence of Alice Johnson, a first-time drug offender who served 21 years of a life sentence on charges of cocaine possession. That decision following a personal Oval Office request from reality star Kim Kardashian West. Sources say Chief of Staff John Kelly and White House counsel Don McGahn advocated against it. Others on the list, lifestyle guru and businesswoman Martha Stewart, though a source familiar says the president has cooled on that idea.
We're going to make a scrumptious meatloaf sandwich, which is Donald's favorite sandwich.
I've never had meatloaf this good.
Stewart was found guilty of lying to investigators about suspicious stock trades. And former Illinois Governor Rod Blagojevich is also on the list. He was on The Apprentice with Trump.
Governor, I have great respect for you.
He was convicted on 17 corruption charges and impeached for trying to sell a U.S. Senate seat. And last week, Trump pardoned conservative author and filmmaker Dinesh D'Souza, who pleaded guilty to violating campaign finance laws. The president tweeted saying he has the absolute right to pardon himself, and his willingness to ignore Justice Department guidelines on issuing pardons has some Democrats worried he'll use it to help allies caught up in the investigation into Russian campaign meddling in 2016, as he did when he pardoned campaign supporter and controversial Arizona Sheriff Joe Arpaio last year for his criminal contempt conviction.
There's thousands and thousands of people that deserve commutations, deserve pardons, and it shouldn't take Kim Kardashian going to the White House to get something like that done.
That was Democratic Senator Cory Booker ending Pamela Brown's report. Mr. Booker also says Mr. Trump's turning the presidential pardon into a media spectacle. The shock closure of Yarrow Stadium in New Plymouth due to earthquake risk will cost Taranaki millions of dollars in lost economic activity. The Taranaki Chamber of Commerce estimates the region will take a $10 million hit annually, but the true figure could be even higher. Our Taranaki Whanganui reporter Robin Martin has more.
In 2008, Venture Taranaki estimated that rugby in the province generated about $7.5 million in revenue annually and contributed about $4.5 million in GDP. It also created about 135 full-time jobs. And when Test football comes to town, the impact is multiplied. The 3 Rugby World Cup games played in New Plymouth in 2011 pumped more than $16 million into the local economy and attracted more than 30,000 visitors. The chief executive of the Taranaki Chamber of Commerce, Arun Chandarai, says the loss of the stadium is a setback.
It's really hard to quantify, but I would guess at least $10 million annually, going as per the old report, which was commissioned by Venture Taranaki in 2009. It will definitely be a big blow, but, they have to address public safety, so this is the only way to go.
The Taranaki Rugby Football Union is a $4.5 million business which generates $2.3 million in commercial revenue. Its chief executive, Jeremy Parkinson, says the loss of Yarrow Stadium puts at risk the relationships which generate that cash.
All of those agreements and relationships are tied into some form of hospitality that is linked into the venue, which was Yarrow Stadium. So effectively the Yarrow Stadium underpinned our commercial business.
Mr Parkinson says the Ramfully Shield holders have been left wondering how to cater for their 750 hospitality guests and 1,600 season ticket holders, let alone its walk-up crowd. When the Taranaki Bulls last held the Shield in 2012, they had an average home gate of 10,000. Mr Parkinson says plans to grow the business are now off the table.
So the key focus is now just rehousing and finding a solution where we can cater to all those. We would have been trying to go out and recruit new season members and continue to grow the business. Now we're scrambling to find a stadium or a facility where we can go and play and deliver to our current partners.
Small stadiums in Tikorangi, Inglewood and Hawera are in discussion, but there's no joy in that for Doc Van Prague, co-owner of Crowded House, New Plymouth's official rugby supporters bar. Doc says the loss of big matches will be felt by everybody.
They're huge for the city, so especially accommodation, hospitality, taxi firms, everything. Retail, everyone gets affected, but I'm dumbfounded on how it's got to this. I don't know, what's the ground been there, 70 years? So what's been going on,
And Doc Van Prague is not the only one left bemused by what's happened at Yarrows.
Pretty disappointing. I don't think they're that old. I don't know, 20 years old or something, so yeah, it's pretty piss poor.
Well, why should it be closed? Spend some money on it.
Live in Stratford, don't care.
I know they use it for other things, don't they? Like the food festival and things like that. Yeah, that would bother me. But rugby doesn't bother me.
I feel like it's more than just about rugby. You could have a stadium for events that come to town. I think it's important to get it fixed.
Even the province's favourite son, Bowden Barrett, is feeling the pain.
A lot of fond memories at that ground. Yeah, it's a bit sad. I'm sure we'll bounce back. We're pretty resilient in that province, so it's a little setback for a proud province, but I'm sure it won't affect the way the boys in Amber and Black will play this season and the support that we get.
Neither the Taranaki Regional Council, which owns the stadium, or the New Plymouth District Council, which manages it, were available for an interview today. In a statement, Taranaki Stadium Trust trustee Mike Neild says geotechnical tests were done ahead of the east and west stands being built in 2002 and fed into their designs. No such tests were done ahead of the 2011 Rugby World Cup upgrade or recent West Stand hospitality suite revamp. A $2 million package to provide temporary facilities at Yarrow was approved in April following the closure of the East Stand late last year. Mr Neild says the package was approved before geotechnical tests on the West Stand were complete because of time pressure ahead of the Mitre 10 Cup, which starts in August. The chief executive of the Taranaki Chamber of Commerce, Arun Chandarai, says there could be a silver lining, but it won't be in the near future.
It's huge. It's a huge economic impact, but I'm quite positive that it's going to give us opportunities to build a brand new facility where we can do a lot more than just rugby. It's a huge knock, but we'll come out stronger.
I ngā mutu mo te hōtaka o te ahi, ko Robin Martin aho.
Meanwhile, some famous Taranaki sons will make history when the All Blacks play France at Auckland's Eden Park on Saturday night. The Barretts, Bowden, Scott and Geordie, will become the first trio of brothers to start a match for the All Blacks. First five Bowden's, of course, one of the team's stars, while an injury to lock Brodie Retallick has handed Scott a spot in the top 15, and the youngest, Geordie's, been rewarded for his strong Super Rugby form with a selection at fullback. Here's Clay Wilson with more on one Kiwi family's significant milestone.
With the rapid rise of Geordie, the family's youngest star, the Barrett clan already made history last year when the trio of brothers appeared together for the All Blacks in the team's season opener against Samoa. But according to the most well-known of the three, 62 times capped Bowden, there is no doubt Saturday night will be even more special.
It's one thing to be selected in the squad together, but to start, it's a very proud moment for me and my family, so it's just one of those childhood dreams you have when you're running around the back lawn pretending to be Christian Cullen or Tana Umanga or whoever it was back then. It's really come true, so can't wait to get out there with them.
On their path to selection for the world's best rugby team, all three Barretts have clearly been blessed with a ton of talent and put in endless hours of hard work. All Blacks coach Steve Hansen acknowledges just this, but says it is another quality which stands out when he thinks about what they bring to the team.
Scooter's more sort of stoic. The other two are backs, obviously, so they're a bit flashier. The one thing they all have in common, though, is a sheer competitiveness. They want to win everything they do, and I like that.
The selection caps a roller coaster week for Geordie Barrett after it was revealed on Sunday he and a friend were questioned by police after apparently walking into the wrong Dunedin flat with McDonald's at 5 a.m. the previous morning. Hansen says they would not have selected the twice-capped 21-year-old if they didn't believe he was ready to take on the challenge of starting in the number 15 jersey.
All he did was got lost and was eating hamburgers at probably too late an hour. We dealt with that pretty quickly as a team, and he's moved on pretty quickly too, but he's been good.
All that remains now is for the Barrett trio to run out together onto Eden Park on Saturday night, cheered on by a raft of family and friends that will include their very proud Nana Mary, who still keeps scrapbooks with every article and story that appear on her grandsons. And if halfback Aaron Smith's assessment of Bowden, Scott and Geordie is anything to go by, they've certainly wowed the selectors who have handed them this historic moment.
These Barretts, they're all pretty good. They're pretty freakishly athletic. It's just impressive that it can be all from the same family, and it blows me away, their abilities.
Moti hotaka o tia hipo nei, ko Clay Wilson aho.
Well, it's billed as connecting with communities. National Party leader Simon Bridges, who's struggling to make headway in the preferred Prime Minister stakes, is trekking around New Zealand in a bid to give so-called ordinary voters the opportunity to get to know him. So what do those who've got up close and personal with the Tauranga MP and would-be Prime Minister make of him? Sarah Murphy followed Mr Bridges to Warkworth to find out.
A steady stream of people make their way through the doors of the Warkworth RSA, taking shelter from a cold and wet day. The barman steers them to his right, as far away as possible from the bar, he says, and from the locals playing snooker out the back. The crowd is here to suss out National Party leader Simon Bridges, and by the time he arrives, about 120 people have packed out the restaurant section, so many that it is overflowing.
I'm here interested to see what he talks about and how he comes across, because when I first heard him I wasn't all that impressed. He's going to become stronger and be more assertive, I believe, but not too assertive. Just keep it down a bit.
Simon's all right. He's just inexperienced, in my opinion.
No. Well, he's got 2 years to learn what he's doing, doesn't he?
He's young and full of ideas, but he's sort of untested still. I don't know. He still needs a lot of maturity.
Just over 4,500 people live in the riverside town of Warkworth, the northernmost part of Auckland's super city. The crowd is the usual one you'd find in an RSA. Only a handful of people under 65 are dotted throughout the room, and it reflects the local population, more than 90% Pākehā. Most voters here are staunch national supporters. But whether he's in the deep south or here in the north, Mr. Bridges has a few practice lines up his sleeve, like this one about meeting his future wife.
When it started going out not long after that, and she told me not that long after, she went home that evening, she called her mother, and she said she met a handsome Japanese man. I like the handsome. I'm not Japanese, by the way. A little bit of Maori in there.
But while the room was full of party faithful, there was still some constructive criticism. One crowd member suggests to Simon Bridges he could be a bit more charismatic during this response.
We are in the age of personality politics, right? You know, just ask Donald Trump. Us, Kim Kardashian, you know? I mean, that's the sort of the world we live in, but substance does matter.
Mr. Bridges may have been the headline act, but it was clear the political rock star at this meeting was local MP Mark Mitchell. He's held the Rodney seat for the past 7 years. And if a recent preferred Prime Minister poll is anything to go by, which had Simon Bridges sitting at 9%, it may take a fair few of these roadshows to turn that around.
Truth is, for me, I got a way to go. You know, it's very early days, and I've just got to get out and do these things and to continue to, you know, work at both, you know, meeting people and getting known, but also having them have a sense of me.
He may have warmed up the crowd in Warkworth, but these tough voters may take a bit more convincing that any of their current leaders, let alone Mr. Bridges, are fit for the country's top job.
That's one thing to say. You come in through the back door. No one comes in through the back door unless you're dodgy.
So there you have it. If you want to lead the country, you need to come in the front door of the Warkworth RSA. I tamaki makaurau mo te hōtaka o te ahiahi, ko Sarah Murphy tēnei.
And the final countdown is on in Auckland's Northcote electorate. The clock is ticking towards a by-election and the Prime Minister's baby as well. Jacinda Ardern hit the streets of the electorate today with Labour's candidate Shannon Halbert in tow, just 2 days before voters go to the polls to choose a replacement for the National MP, Jonathan Coleman. But the talk on the street was whether an early arrival might help or hinder Labour's chances. Our reporter Katie Scotcher was there and filed this report.
Jacinda Ardern was greeted by a group of beaming children from a local preschool as she arrived in Northcote this afternoon.
Thank you. Did you come out of daycare to say hello? Oh, it's so nice of you. Oh, you're Tiny Tots. And you came out of daycare. Where are you off to now?
The Prime Minister.
Oh, that's me! That's me.
After some pictures, Ms Ardern and Labour candidate Shannon Halbert made a quick stop at the local supermarket to speak to workers. While she didn't purchase any salt and vinegar chips, which she craved at the beginning of her pregnancy, the Prime Minister did surprise some shoppers. Beth Railton was paying for her groceries as Ms Ardern and her supporters made their way past the checkouts. She says it was nice seeing her out and meeting locals.
I was quite surprised. I thought the baby was about to pop, so it's cool that she's still out and about, but like most young mums, we have to do the same. You still got to get out there.
Ms Ardern and Mr Halbert were flanked by supporters decked out in party t-shirts and ribbons as they stopped to meet Northcote shop owners, locals and mums. One of those locals, Janice Choi, took her baby to meet Ms Ardern. Ms Choi says it was fantastic seeing the Prime Minister out in full force so close to her due date.
It's definitely hard being pregnant and let alone being Prime Minister going up and down. She's inspiration to all the women, really, working women, to be honest.
The selfies and hugs are likely to continue until the last possible moment in what's expected to be a tight race. 2 targeted polls from Labour show Shannon Halbert within 2 points of national rival Dan Boudoir, but National says its internal polling shows a more comfortable gap of 8. Mr Halbert says he's feeling really good about Saturday's by-election and says even if the baby makes an early arrival, people should still get out and vote.
It could work either way. You know, if baby arrives, it would probably be a really positive thing, and in anticipation of baby arriving, people would just get on, do the mahi and hopefully bring home a victory for Labour and this community in Northcote.
Mr Halbert says he's offered to be a babysitter for the Prime Minister and a name for the unborn baby.
I did give her a name on Facebook Live the other night. I said, well, Shannon would be a great name. because none of us know the gender yet. That, you know, it could go either way. Shannon if it's a girl, Shannon if it's a boy, and the spelling of my name is a great example of that.
Mr Halbert isn't the only one with suggestions. 4-year-old Sophie and Isla from Tiny Tots Preschool also have some ideas.
I was thinking that the name was going to be Poppy or Daisy.
However, the preschool class was divided on the baby's gender.
And do you hope the baby's going to be a boy or a girl?
A girl.
Yeah?
A boy!
Just 10 days out from her due date, Jacinda Ardern says she's feeling good.
And obviously still trucking along, and you'll see me probably for a few days yet.
Jacinda Ardern plans to work until she goes into labour, whenever that may be. She'll hand over power to Deputy Prime Minister Winston Peters when she arrives at hospital. In Auckland for Checkpoint, ko Katie Scotcher tēnei.
And time for a quick bit of feedback before the news. This one in from Alan, who says the Tolaga Bay disasters highlighted what a waste of resources forestry / represents. Typically, no one's considered or done any forward planning on the issue. There's an awful lot of forestry due for harvest up the east coast in the next few years. It wouldn't take that much to rake the slash into piles, chip it and ship it out on the nicely new restored rail link. Here's Katrina with the news.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi o te pō. Good evening, ko Katrina Batten aho. The National Party is accusing New Zealand First of feathering its nest in the north by allocating more than half the money out of the Provincial Growth Fund to projects in Northland. It says Northland projects have won $61 million, while the rest of the regions combined have only received just over $42 million. National's Economic Development spokesperson Paul Goldsmith says given that 2 of New Zealand's first MPs stood in Northland at the last election, including the Regional Development Minister Shane Jones, the funding imbalance is unfair. However, Mr Jones says only a small proportion of the fund has been allocated and projects around the country are in the pipeline. And Shane Jones says Cabinet will discuss on Monday what assistance the government can provide to the Taraifiti area after torrential rain caused widespread damage this week in Tolaga Bay. The Gisborne District Council estimates it will cost at least $10 million to clean up the forestry debris strewn across roads and properties by the flooding. Shane Jones says the photos he's seen of the damage floored him, and the Cabinet will be fully briefed on Monday.
Get some advice from Honourable Meka Whaitiri, who's actually been up there, and the officials who've been there day after day. And it's not unlike any other situation where we've had an awful hazardous event. Ascertain what practically can the government do in the short term. I think in the medium to long term, the challenges are there.
Shane Jones, the Forestry Ministry. Almost a fifth of central Auckland homes bought in the first 3 months of the year went to a foreign buyer. Official figures show that overall in the March quarter, nearly 33,000 homes changed hands, of just which 3% were people from overseas. However, the number of foreign buyers jumps to 7% in Auckland and almost 20% in the central Auckland suburbs. The Associate Finance Minister, David Parker, says this backs up his government's plans to ban foreign buyers to ease pressure on the market. Avocado growers in the far north have won the right to take 2 million cubic metres of water a year from the Opori aquifer. 17 companies applied to the Northland Regional Council to use the aquifer to irrigate thousands of hectares of new orchards north of Gaitaia. Lois Williams reports.
DOC objected on the basis that not enough is known about the aquifer or its links to protected wetlands. Independent commissioners acknowledged that uncertainty, but they've approved the resource consents with conditions. They include a staged approach to taking the maximum water volumes and constant monitoring. Local farmer and conservationist Kevin Matthews says that's essentially a suck-it-and-see decision.
I'm not sure that that's good enough. I think there still needs to be further investigation before the consents are given. It certainly confirms what the DOC submission was about, that there wasn't enough information currently to give the consent.
Kevin Matthews. The Conservation Department says it will decide over the next 3 weeks whether to challenge the avocado irrigation consents in the Environment Court. This is Lois Williams.
A Korean tourist who was missing for 6 days in Australia in the bush in far north Queensland has been found alive and well. 25-year-old Juhi Han was found very dehydrated and airlifted out of the Mount Tyson area by helicopter. Inspector Steve Kersley says Ms Han, who had no bush skills, went missing on Friday, but her disappearance wasn't reported until yesterday. He says, fortunately, police followed up on reports of screaming in the area.
We did receive some information this morning that there may have been somebody yelling on Saturday. So as a result of that, we did a bit of mapping and sent one crew down off the side of the hill in the same direction as what the voices may or may not have been heard. And luckily enough, it was heard, and she's been located.
Steve Kersley says the bushwalk Ms Han had gone on is known for being dangerous and difficult. Skiers have taken to South Island slopes earlier than predicted, with the remarkable ski field near Queenstown open for the season today. Cold, damp weather conditions over the past month have coated the southern mountains in natural snow. NZ Ski's Chief Executive Paul Anderson says opening 2 days early is a signal that it will be a great ski season.
For us, it's so important to get open on time, and getting open earlier is even better, because it sends a positive signal to the market that we're open for business and it's going to be a great season. We know that in years where we get open with all facilities on day one, that our bookings are up about 20%. So we're expecting a great year this year.
Paul Anderson says the New Zealand ski industry is in good shape, with big investments made to attract visitors. The Mount Hutt ski field in Canterbury will open on Friday. It's 6:05. Sport. The captain of the Black Caps says the biggest impact Mike Hesson has as a coach is changing the team culture. The 43-year-old Hesson will step down at the end of next month after 6 years in the role. Hesson had a rocky start when he dumped Ross Taylor as captain, but turned the team around, guiding them to the 2015 World Cup final and the world's top ranking in 2020 cricket. Kane Williamson says Hesson's strength lay in his management skills.
The personal management, the team management, I mean, from a cricketing cultural perspective, was hugely instrumental. Getting a bunch of guys moving in a similar direction, and look, I think that does help on field, but the focus that he brought in was not about the winning and losing. That's the byproduct of trying to get things right behind the scenes, and that's where he put a lot of his time and effort.
Kane Williamson. The Golden State Warriors are just one game away from their third NBA title in 4 years. They've beaten the Cleveland Cavaliers 110-102 in Game 3 of the best-of-7 finals series to go 3-0 up, with the possible series decider in Cleveland on Saturday. Rafael Nadal will resume his rain-interrupted French Tennis Open quarterfinal against Argentine Diego Schwartzman tonight, with the defending champion trailing by a set, but up 5-3 in the second set. In the other interrupted quarterfinal, Marin Cilic and Juan Martín del Potro are in a first-set tiebreak. Both women's semi-finals are tonight, with top seed Simona Halep playing third seed Garbine Muguruza and Sloane Stephens playing fellow American Madison Keys. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Alison Ballance looks at the science of intelligence. That's human intelligence. William Dart assesses the latest album from Jonathan Bree during New Horizons. And our overseas correspondent, Shobhanarian, is on the line from Bangalore, India, where it's already wet, even though the monsoon hasn't arrived yet.
And unlike Brian, I can't tell you exactly what we're up to because it's an ever-changing landscape as we head towards 10 p.m. I do know we'll wrap up the day's news in the long bulletin at 10, and I'll be talking to newsmakers from around the country with an eye on international events from the foreign desk. That's Lately with Karen Hay, live between 10 and 11 weeknights on RNZ National.
Met Service weather through to midnight tomorrow. Northland, scattered showers, clearing early tomorrow, then fine. Auckland to Taumaranui, also Coromandel Bay of plenty in Taupo. Generally fine, but cloud and the odd light shower for a time today. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, showers turning to rain later today, easing tomorrow and clearing south of Wairoa. Taranaki and Taihape to Kapiti, rain for a time today, falling as snow above 700 metres, partly cloudy tomorrow with isolated morning showers. Wellington and Wairarapa, rain easing to showers this afternoon, clearing tomorrow and becoming fine. Nelson, Buller, Westland and Fiordland, mostly fine, but a few showers about the west coast late tomorrow. Marlborough and Canterbury, cloud and the odd shower about Marlborough, North Canterbury and Banks Peninsula until early tomorrow, otherwise mainly fine. Otago and Southland, cloudy periods today with a few showers about the south coast, fine tomorrow, and the Chatham Islands showers. It's 6:05, and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thank you very much, Katrina. I am Rowan Quinn, sitting in tonight for John Campbell. Jenny Salesa, the Minister for Building and Construction and Ethnic Communities, has fronted up to acknowledge she overspent taxpayer money. Earlier this year, it was revealed Ms Salesa, the 16th ranked minister, had expenses of more than $30,000 in the last 2 months of last year, more than the Prime Minister. Ms Salesa refused to be interviewed then and again refused to be interviewed for a follow-up story on Checkpoint earlier this week, where we reported she used Crown cars to attend sports games and travel to bars. But less than an hour ago, Ms Salesa arrived at Radio New Zealand to tell Zach Fleming her travel was all above board.
I've put systems in place to ensure that taxpayers' money are much better used. I was an absolutely new minister, and you'd see from my travel from the second quarter that I'm now a minister that's average in terms of spends. And so one of the things also that happens is, as number 16 in the cabinet, when Crown cars are booked, if there are other higher ranked ministers that book cars, you do get dropped off, and subcontractor rates or contractor rates are much higher.
Was there an element of frivolous spending as well then? You said that you perhaps didn't use taxpayer money as efficiently as you could have.
I wouldn't call it frivolous. I would say that all of my travel was in my capacity as a minister. And if we could just address the article or the link that you had put out, if we could just go through, say point by point, the things that you pointed out on there, and I could basically give you answers about those travel.
Yeah, I asked you to do that a couple of days ago and a couple of weeks ago as well, and you said no to that. Why did you say no in advance? I mean, we could have had a conversation about the travel that you had. I asked your office for your ministerial diary and your office declined. There was many opportunities for us to be able to double check that travel, and at every opportunity you declined. I'm just wondering why that was.
Hindsight is a wonderful thing, and I should have actually been interviewed. And yes, in terms of OIA information, we collate a lot of data, my staff do, and so one of the processes of government is when a lot of data is asked for, it goes through the OIA process. Now, as I say, I should have been interviewed, because all of those things that you pointed out, for instance, the brew kitchen bar incident. Yes, I did go to that brew kitchen, but that was for the Nation recording of the Christmas show, and I was interviewed as Minister of Building and Construction. You said that I went to a gym. I wish I was a gym member. I don't own a gym membership. That was me visiting a provider as Minister of Building and Construction in East Tamaki. I think the other thing you said was that I went to the Wellington Club. I did. In my capacity as Minister of as Minister of Ethnic Communities, there was an event there that was held by the Ambassador of Japan. All of these things I attended because I was representing the government.
Is that including the many rugby games that you went to? You went to Hamilton and back twice for 2 rugby games, and you also went to one in Auckland and then caught a Crown car to an event afterwards and then back home again, and the taxpayer paid for all of that. That was all essential too?
It was all as a representative of government. So I was representing the government. You would know that the Rugby World Cup, the government is one of the major sponsors. Now, I was asked to represent the government for several reasons. I'm the only Tongan-born, Tongan-speaking MP in Parliament today. And we had dignitaries coming from overseas, the Prime Minister of Tonga for 2 games and the King of Tonga for 1 game. You might also recall that there was a lot of tension happening at the time after a teenager unfortunately burnt a Samoan flag. So I was also attending because I actually stepped up and appealed both to Tongans and to Samoans to try and mediate and calm things down.
As you said a few times, although you've reined in your spending, right? So there must have been money to be saved. There must have been things that you did wrong before that you've corrected now. So what are those things that you've done? I noticed that Just before your expenses came out, you drove yourself to the airport for the first time, and that's something that Andrew Little has done. He drove himself to Taranaki for the oil and gas meeting that he did down there. Are those the kinds of things that you're doing now instead of catching, Crown limos and stuff?
Absolutely. That is actually one of the reasons why I'm now average in terms of spending in the second quarter, is I hardly ever use Crown cars now. Either I drive myself, or if I have to go to meetings, especially here in the city, I just use normal taxis.
And that's Zach Fleming there talking to MP Jenny Salesa. Well, the EQC's chief executive says a critical report into wide-ranging deficiencies at the EQC made public yesterday is absolutely correct in its findings. The report, authored by the independent ministerial advisor Christine Stevenson, found a culture hamstrung by disorder and dysfunction. Among its recommendations is a requirement to change the way caseloads are managed and to treat claimants with more empathy and respect. The Minister for the EQC, Dr Megan Woods, told Checkpoint yesterday that she wants all the report's recommendations implemented. The CEO for EQC, Sid Miller, says he accepts the report but is at a loss to explain how things got so bad. He says he's assured the Minister he's focused on addressing the concerns.
The key thing for me was sort of around about September last year. I put in place all the actions for a case management model, and that included the setting up of the Canterbury Business Unit. So really getting that working is very much a high priority for me. And there's a number of reasons in that, but the main one being it gives the customer a single point of focus for working through and addressing their claim. And so then as an organisation, in terms of how do we support the case management, I know the report recommends additional resource to get the case management level down to 100. I actually want to go further than that, because where you're dealing with very complex cases, I think 100 is too high. And so we're looking at the resourcing and how do we get settlement specialists that have a claim management, have a caseload that they can actually manage very effectively to deliver good customer experience. The other key piece.
It's June now, and you started that in September. The report that's come out says there are still problems. So what can you change now, and what's your first priority for changing?
Absolutely. So the other piece that we've actually got going on in the organisation is we are reviewing all our processes, the culture, the people, the system side of things. So we're looking at every process and how we work, what actually happens, what is the customer experience through that, how can we remove blockages in there or points where the customer has to wait for something. So what are all the things we can do to improve the speed with which resolution occurs? How do we deal with how we communicate and how often we communicate, and get all those things built in? So we're actually taking a full look at the whole way we work to address all the different issues.
Some of the recommendations in the report were that EQC needed to be better at treating customers with respect and honesty. It needed more empathy, needed to be more transparent. How did it come to this?
I can't really say, specifically go, well, this occurred at this point in time. I can't say that. All I can say is, I am focused on ensuring we address these issues. I have been with the whole focus on the case management piece, because that does treat people with much more empathy and respect. But there's a lot more we can do other than just case management, and that's the way we communicate. It's actually by speeding up the whole process and informing people about where they are in that process, so they understand what they're going to receive from EQC and when. So look, I'm focused on fixing this, moving forward and addressing these recommendations.
The report says that even EQC's own staff couldn't have confidence in the data and the numbers, and we've seen the numbers change so often. How do you address that? What specifically are you doing to make sure that the data is correct?
Yeah. So we've, I mean, as you mentioned, we've had this problem with we've moved from a version 4 of our claims management system to a version 8, and we identified additional claims within there. But what that has enabled us to do is to get better clarity on the numbers and where the claims are within the individual sort of settlement cycle.
What's your message for those who have a claim relating to an unsold house?
In terms of the EQC position and trying to deal with their claim in accordance with the Act, then absolutely we're focused on addressing those. In terms of dealing with the issues that the report mentions about unsold, we're working with Treasury and the Minister and the legal community in terms of looking at the test cases there to try and find a solution for this, which is where the problem is, if you like, above the EQC Act. So but we'll still deal with it within the bounds of the Act.
What about the Official Information Act, making people go through that kind of burdensome process for information that they were entitled to? It must have been a waste of money as well as potentially a waste of time. Are you prepared to open that up as the report has suggested?
Absolutely. Making that easier for people is a key key priority from the report, and how do we do that, and giving them access to that information. So absolutely.
And that was the EQC CEO Sid Miller there. A lawyer says a man fatally stabbed by his son was a brutal, controlling bully. The son, father and many of the witnesses in the case in the High Court in Auckland can't be named due to wide-ranging suppression orders. The Crown says the son stabbed his father knowing that his actions could cause death and that he should be found guilty of murder. The lawyers for the son say he was acting in self-defence. Our court reporter Edward Gay filed this report.
In her closing address, the son's lawyer Denise Warwick said her client, his mother and siblings had all been victims of family violence and lived in constant fear of their father. On one occasion, when her client was just a boy, his father picked him, his siblings and mother up from a woman's refuge where they had sought shelter. He drove them out of town to a paddock where he pulled his wife out of the car while the children looked on.
The beating consists of punching her head, kicking her in the face, kicking her in the ribs while she's already down on the ground. It was a severe beating.
Miss Warwick said her client frequently stepped in to take a beating from his father in order to save his mother. On the night he was killed, the father had beaten his wife while their young baby was in the house.
Punching her numerous times in the head and face. She falls down. She tries to put her arms up to protect herself. He just started booting her in the ribs.
She was eventually able to get out of the house and make the 30-minute walk to where her son and daughter lived with her baby in a pram. But her husband, high on methamphetamine, followed. On the third occasion, the family barricaded themselves in the house as their father went around, kicking at the door, putting his hand through the windows and yelling threats. When he eventually drove off in the daughter's car, they thought he had gone, and the son armed himself with a knife and went to investigate. But his father was actually on the deck. Miss Warwick said the son was subjected to a surprise attack in the dark and was overpowered by a violent and aggressive man.
In those circumstances, you may think that stabbing 5 or 6 times was perfectly reasonable.
The son didn't flee the scene. Instead, he held his father, telling him how sorry he was. She quoted from the son's police interview that was recorded just hours after the killing.
I didn't mean to do it. I hope he doesn't die. He's a bastard, but I love my dad.
The Crown Prosecutor Gareth Case said before the attack, the son knew the police were on their way and that his father had been locked out of the house. The son stabbed his father 6 times with the knife, including a fatal blow to his chest that nicked his lungs and the sac holding the heart. In contrast, the son had few injuries, a sore back, sore ribs and a sore face from where he was punched.
Was he really in such jeopardy, in the circumstances as he believed them to be, that he needed to kill his father? I suggest to you the evidence is he was virtually unharmed. A few scrapes, bumps, bruises. And what that highlights in the Crown's submission to you is that the defendant's actions that evening were excessive.
Mr. Case quoted the son from his interview with the police.
Near the end of his own interview, he says, look, I don't feel I handled it the right way. And the Crown says no truer words have been spoken. Later in his interview, he said, I'm not trying to justify what I did. I know it wasn't right.
Mr Kays acknowledged the father had been nasty and hostile on the night.
But I suggest to you the worst the defendant believed he could receive was a lumping, an assault, a hiding.
He said the force that was used was simply not reasonable. Tomorrow, Justice Duffy will sum up the case before the jurors retire to consider their verdict. Mo te hōtaka o te ahi, ko Edward Gayahau.
Te Reo could soon have a starring role on Netflix if a young Maori TV producer gets his way. A new Maori media industry group is being launched to ensure Maori media keeps pace with a changing world. Te Pai Tawhiti has been set up by the Maori broadcasting funding agency Te Māngai Pāho to ramp up Maori content and revitalise Te Reo Māori across all media. Te Manu Korehi reporter John Boynton has more.
Young Māori producer Sunny Ngātai says Māori content can shine in the new media landscape. He's a rangatahi representative on Te Pai Tawhiti and wants to encourage the push for Māori content on the global stage.
Imagine what kind of feeling everyone would have if they saw, Whai Kōrero or something like that on Netflix, or, you could search up some of your favourite reel programs on Amazon.
He says people no longer have to view whatever's served up by networks. Smartphones and social media mean every person's practically a walking TV station. And Māori youth are great storytellers.
Because we've thought of a story, we've thought of a way on how to tell that story, we're sharing content to entertain people, and really we're just using the platforms we have to tell our own stories when we want to.
Te Pai Tawhiti will be made up of 14 members from across New Zealand's media industry. They include broadcasters such as RNZ, Māori Television, TVNZ and iwi Radio, agencies like New Zealand On Air and the New Zealand Film Commission, and representatives from independent Māori production houses and rangatahi Māori. The group's recommendations will guide the decisions Te Māngai Pāho makes on the funding of Māori content and helping to revitalise Te Reo Māori. Te Māngai Pāho Chief Executive Larry Parr says it's all about collaboration.
We have for a long time in our sector operated in silos, and we don't think that that's sustainable.
Te Māngai Pāho funds $50 million of Māori content on iwi radio, television and new media platforms per year. Larry Parr says there won't be immediate changes to the current funding process, but with a shift in focus.
We tick those boxes, but we're not necessarily focusing on the quality of the hours we fund and the audience engagement with the hours we fund.
Television producer Bailey Mackey will be the new chairman of Te Pai Tawhiti and says the media industry's been shaken up by huge changes in technology.
When I grew up on the East Coast, we only had one TV channel, partly due to the fact I think we were hooking up a wire to the house next door, to the Pākehā farmer next door, but now there are so many content channels and platforms available.
The group will also be tasked with encouraging more Māori talent. Mr Mackey, who runs Pango Productions, has had a career which has taken him across the globe. He says he'd love to see more Māori do the same.
I definitely think that it would be good if there were more opportunities given to young Māori, whether or not it be in big international studios or production companies.
The new Māori media group and strategy is being launched tonight in Wellington. Mo te hōtaka o te ahi pōnei, ko John Boynton ahau.
Into France now, where a man has won the country's My Million lottery for the second time in less than 2 years, beating truly astronomical odds. The winner, who wasn't named, won his first €1 million prize, which is about 1.6 million New Zealand dollars in 2016, but he continued to play each week. Last month he won again, the BBC's Lucy Williamson reports.
Among those tuning in to France's My Million lottery draw last month was one man who already knew what it felt like to win. He'd won the €1 million jackpot back in November 2016, but continued to play every week as usual. As the winning numbers were called on the 18th of May, the same man won again, pocketing another €1 million. My Million is a smaller draw run alongside the main Euro Millions lottery. Players in Euro Millions, with its multi-million euro prizes, are automatically entered for the second draw, with a series of randomly assigned numbers. The chances of winning twice have been put at 16 trillion to 1. The newsagent where the winner bought his latest lucky ticket said he was a regular client who always played the same numbers. He barely reacted when he found out he'd won, the manager told us. I guess he's used to winning. Still, according to one newspaper, the winner told the French lottery company that he was planning to continue playing, trusting in the old adage that things always come in threes.
And that was the BBC's Lucy Williamson reporting there. Just a little bit of feedback here on the Tolaga Bay story. Someone here has said, plant the east coast out in Manuka. Can't some of the waste be chipped for paper or chipboard? That's some of that slash that washed away in all the flooding there earlier this week. And also someone else has suggested that east coast erosion issue could be easily solved by planting hemp. Well, look, thank you very much for joining us here tonight on Checkpoint. That's us for this evening, and thanks for joining in however you did on your radio, your TV, online. You can catch up with our stories tonight on rnz.co.nz/checkpoint or on our Facebook page. And for all the latest news, information, feature stories from New Zealand and around the world, go to the rnz.co.nz homepage. And now from me, Rowan Quinn, and all our fabulous Checkpoint team, have a lovely evening.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The Prime Minister says the National Party's claims the government has wasted up to $200 million on working groups and reviews are false and misleading. Jacinda Ardern says external groups are doing 38 reviews at a cost of less than $35 million. The Regional Development Minister is rejecting National's accusations New Zealand First is playing favourites in Northland. Shane Jones says the government has yet to allocate the biggest share of the Provincial Growth Fund. It could take 6 months to investigate whether logging companies operating in the flood-hit Tolaga Bay area have breached their resource consents. New figures show 7% of Auckland home buyers are from overseas, jumping to almost 20% in the central suburbs. A toddler seriously injured on a conveyor belt at Auckland International Airport is now in a stable condition. Far North avocado growers say they can't be certain of